Hey, what's going on, guys? Today I'll be talking about each team's biggest in-division rival heading into 2025. This on another episode of... Let's start off with the NFC East. So, for the NFC East, it's pretty simple. If you're the Giants, Cowboys, or Commanders, your biggest rival is the Eagles, because they just won the Super Bowl. It's that simple. They're the big boy on the block right now, and they're the ones you're going to have to look out for. Now, that's pending another NFC East who's going to win the division switch, because it hasn't been consistent in forever. Now, for the Eagles, it's a little more complicated. The traditional pick would be Dallas, but it's not Dallas, because your biggest in-division rival is the Washington Commanders, because they're good now. They got Jaden Daniels, they're a real challenge, they're building up their team, and they will likely be the main contender to dethrone Philadelphia in division in 2025. So next up, we got the NFC North. Now, the NFC North, it's in 2024 was a very competitive place. I don't think that's going to change. I think if you're the Chicago Bears, well, your biggest rival is still the Packers, because they're Big Brother, and Big Brother has been beating you forever. So until that changes, the Bears will, regardless of who's the best in that division, will always have their main rival be the Green Bay Packers, because it's just the history. You can't overcome it. Neither of the other two teams in that division have so consistently bullied Chicago like Green Bay has. Now, I think if you're the Detroit Lions, you share something with Chicago here, because your biggest rival is also the Green Bay Packers. The Lions were challenged by both the Minnesota Vikings and the Packers in 2024, but I think with Sam Darnold leaving Minnesota, the true contender to the Lions' dominance of the NFC North is now the Packers. Now for the Packers and the Minnesota Vikings. Well, I think for both of these teams, it's pretty obvious. Their biggest rival in division will be the Detroit Lions in 2025. And that's because the Lions are atop the division right now. It's pretty clear. So next up, we have the NFC South. Now, the NFC South, a little more wide open than the other two divisions we've already talked about, and I think that reflects it in who these teams view as their biggest rival. Because for both the Panthers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it's the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons have been improving. Their roster is very good. They just needed an answer quarterback, and of course they do need pass rush. But for the Buccaneers, their biggest threat to them in the 2024 season was the Atlanta Falcons. And for the Panthers, they just have a weird rivalry with the Falcons that I think transcends who the best team in that division is. But for the Atlanta Falcons and the New Orleans Saints, I think it's a little different, because their biggest rival in 2025 will be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay has been atop the NFC South for the past few seasons, and the Saints and Falcons have been the main challengers to that, although the Saints are sort of collapsing, so it might just be the Falcons next year. And next up, we have the NFC West. Now, for the NFC West, I think for the 49ers, it's the Seattle Seahawks, because the Seahawks are probably the most challenging team for the 49ers moving forward. The 49ers have had a past history of constantly beating up on the Rams, so even if the Rams, I think the Rams are the best team in that division in 2025, but for the 49ers, they've always been able to sort of eke out wins against the Rams, so I don't think the 49ers will view the Rams as their biggest rival. For the Seattle Seahawks and Cardinals, however, it is the Rams, because the Rams have consistently been able to beat up on both of the Cardinals and the Seahawks. I don't think it's going to change. I think for both of those teams, the Rams are the biggest threat to their success, and it'll be interesting to see how they handle that. And to finish off the NFC West, the biggest rival of the LA Rams is the Seattle Seahawks, because the Seattle Seahawks are the most improved team of that division this offseason. And I don't think the 49ers will be as good as they have been in years past. Moving on to the AFC East. So in the AFC East, there's a few interesting things going on here. The Bills' biggest rival in 2025 will be the Miami Dolphins. They're the best put together team that's challenging the Bills. I don't think the Jets or Patriots are there yet. And Miami Dolphins, at least when they're playing in somewhere with warm weather, are a great team. With that being said, for the rest of the division, it's pretty simple. If you're the Dolphins, Jets, or Patriots, the Bills are your biggest rival because they're the best team in that division. They're on top. And until they're not on top, the trend will continue. So moving on to the AFC North. Here we have the Baltimore Ravens, and the Baltimore Ravens' biggest rival in 2025 will be the Cincinnati Bengals. And the reason being is because the Bengals and the Ravens have put in the past season have put up some of the most electric shootout games, and that will probably be the case again in 2025. The Bengals will still probably not have a defense, and their offense will still be very electric. So the Bengals and Ravens, they're going to be a great matchup to watch. And for the Ravens, the Bengals are definitely their biggest rival because they are the ones who will push their team both offensively and defensively to the limit. For the Cincinnati Bengals, their biggest rival is obviously the Ravens. The Ravens are the ones on top of the division, thus the Bengals have to get by them. And I think that's the same for the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they had a good season, but the Ravens still are on top. And the Ravens finally learned how to beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, which that's the biggest part of this. And moving forward, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Bengals will have to work to get past the Ravens. Now, for the weird one here, it's the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns' biggest rival is the Pittsburgh Steelers because that's just who the Browns are. They have that little brother mentality to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they will honestly, regardless of how they do, nothing will give them more joy of beating any of these teams than beating the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that's why, for now, until the Browns actually make something of themselves, their biggest rival is Pittsburgh. So next up, we have the AFC South. For the AFC South, it's pretty interesting because the Houston Texans, their biggest rival is the Indianapolis Colts because the Colts, I think roster-wise, have the best chance of overthrowing the Texans in division in 2025. And for the Tennessee Titans, it's the Houston Texans because the Texans are the best team in division. The Titans are actually probably the worst. So their biggest rival to look forward to attempting to try and get rid of is obviously going to be the best team in division. For the Indianapolis Colts, they're an interesting one because their biggest rival, regardless of how good the Texans or Titans are, it's going to be the Jaguars because they just have that mentality they cannot beat them in Jacksonville. And I thought that was a joke for the longest time until I realized they really, in several years, have not been able to beat Jacksonville at home, regardless of how good or bad Jacksonville is. And I feel like just there is that rivalry that has been built up because of this weird inconsistency for the Colts, that regardless of who else is in the division, their biggest rival will be the Jaguars. And finally, for the Jacksonville Jaguars, their biggest rival is the Texans. Again, the Texans are atop that division. Thus, any team below them, they're going to have a very healthy rivalry with that team. And that's the case for Jacksonville. And finally, we have the AFC West. Now, this is not going to surprise anyone when I say the Raiders, Chargers, and Broncos' biggest rivals, the Kansas City Chiefs, because obviously they're atop the division. And for the Kansas City Chiefs, their biggest rival in 2025 will be the Chargers. The Chargers, I think, under Harbaugh, are building something great out there in LA, and it'll be interesting to see how that team progresses and gets better heading into year 2 in his system. I think they'll be the biggest challenge to the Kansas City Chiefs in 2025. With that being said, guys, please like, subscribe, and share. Comment down below, and I'll see you next time.